Okay, we've come to the end of this series where we've built out this voting app from scratch. Now, I can keep going, but the series has to end somewhere. I think the app in its current state is more than enough as an MVP, but there's always room for more features and improvement. At this point, I'm not sure if the app is actually going into production, but if it does, I still need to make some tweaks before handing it over to Jeffrey. With that being said, let me share with you my list of to-dos and potential features for the app, which I've been taking note of along the way. So back to Bear here. So there will likely be some design tweaks from Adrian now that the app is somewhat complete in the browser. I'm sure there's some things we can tweak. So I mentioned this in the last video. Having support for Markdown for the ideas and comments would be a good thing. So you can format your idea, add things like links. And if you take a look at the Laracast forum, I'm sure you noticed that you can use Markdown here. So yeah, it will be similar to that where we can have a Markdown preview as you write your Markdown in here. So for this one, add filter for most comments. So yeah, we'd be adding more filters here. In the filter section, we only have a few here, and some of these are only limited to the admin, but we definitely have to add more filters here. So filter is similar to what you see here in the forum. So for example, popular this week, popular all time, and so on. So definitely one that sorts by most comments, as that's a good indication for popular ideas. So also, I'll probably take a look at refactoring that section. You can see it here. And as we add more filters, you can see that it's getting quite messy. So I believe there is some short discussion on this on one of the videos. So where is it? I think it's in episode 29, where we have some discussion on it. Like I said, I think Jeffrey did a video on it. So take a look at one way of possibly refactoring this code. Next, remove attach buttons. So we probably won't add the ability to upload files as we have to maintain a file server. And if I were to add this feature, you can just link to images hosted on other servers. So yeah, I would remove all the attach buttons in the app. For example, here and everywhere else it shows. Open status top nav. So yeah, right now for some reason there's no open status in the top nav. So we'd probably include that in there somewhere. Loading spinner or skeleton. So I did this for the notifications. You can't see it here because it loads really quickly. But when the content is loading in, we have a skeleton loader here. And you can incorporate this into the ideas as well. This is, what is this? If you edit title, change slug. If a user edits their idea and changes the title, I was asking myself a question and I was asking if the slug should change as well. I think my answer to that is no. I just added it here in my notes. Next is show stats for filtered results. So it'd be nice to see how many results there are whenever you filter the ideas. For example, if I were to filter by this and this, I don't know how many results there are. It'd be nice to show some sort of stats here. Okay, what's next? This is if you're serious about grammar. For example, if we had only one vote here, then this text should be vote instead of votes. And same for comments here. What's next? Like comments. So yeah, this would be the same as voting for ideas, but now we'd be liking comments. So in one of the episodes, I discussed this already. You can either have a polymorphic relationship and store it on the same table as the votes, or you can just have a separate table. If I were to implement comments, I would probably have a separate table, mainly because the language that we're using will probably be likes or hearts for comments and not the same as votes. What's next? Reply to comments. So right now, our comments feature is very basic. You can only reply to the actual idea and not to individual comments. So that could be an extra feature you could work on. This might involve some sort of recursion, so it can be quite tricky. Definitely take a look at this package, which has support for nested comments and a bunch of other features when it comes to having comments in your app. Next is wire model. Okay, this is to minimize the number of requests. So you can just use wire model defer if you want to minimize those, so that there's no round trip to the server every time, say for example, you type something in here. But I personally don't think it's too much of an issue, but you can just defer everything if you think it is. Next is use / to focus search input. So this is a common pattern I see in many websites. For example, the Laravel docs, you can press / to focus the search bar, and then you can search for something here. So yeah, that shouldn't be too hard to implement using Alpine. Next is blue shadow around button. This is just cosmetic. The blue buttons should have a subtle outer glow similar to this. And in here, I didn't do that. Slug for filters. So right now for our filters, if I were to filter something here, and if there's a space in the filter, and all of them do have spaces, you'll see that the space gets encoded into %20 here, which isn't the cleanest URL. So I'll probably look into making this a slug, and we are using that sluggable package, so it should be pretty straightforward. This has to do with keeping the query string clean. So let's take a look at that. So you can run into scenarios where your query string is something like this. Doesn't really make sense. I think we can recreate that if we, let me just reset this. Let's just go to the home page here. If I were to search for something and then delete it, you'll see that we have this empty query string variable here. And you can get rid of that if you just do something like this in the documentation. So just add this except array, and then you can avoid those situations. Next, focus buttons follow rounded corners. So yeah, a lot of the focus states don't follow the rounded corners here. So for example, if I were to tab through this, those ones do follow it, but the buttons do too. But this one, for example, doesn't follow the rounded corners, and you can make use of Tailwind's ring utilities to make that happen. So you can take a look at the documentation in here. So you can just do focus rings right here. Vote increment animation like Twitter. So I actually started researching this. So instead of just having the vote increment or decrement, it'd be nice to have an animation in here, just like Twitter does. And I have some code here just for the animation part, which we can take a look at quickly. Let's grab this. Let's go into Tailwind Play. Where is that? So if you go to play.tailwindcss.com, you can play around with Tailwind. So let me just paste that code in. And you can see we have this animation here when I hover. So that would be the animation we have when we click either vote or unvote. Something like that. And if you like a tweet on Twitter, you have that heart exploding animation, but you also have this counter effect, which is pretty cool. And if you want to take a quick look at this, it's pretty straightforward. Just make sure you have overflow hidden on, and then we do a translate on the number so that the other one shows up. Next is caching. I'll probably take a look at that as well. Instead of hitting your database all the time, maybe having a caching layer in front will help with performance. Next is browser tests with Cypress or Dusk. So we have a pretty good test suite, but they're all feature tests on the HTTP layer. So we do have a good amount of JavaScript that's not being tested. So for those cases, I would reach for either Cypress or Dusk. We also have to do some browser testing in other browsers. We already saw one issue that we fixed in Firefox in the last video, and I haven't even taken a look at how it renders in Safari yet. And the last point I have here is a README MD for installation, and I'll make sure to add this in the GitHub repo in case you want to install this on your own local machine and play around. So yeah, that's it for this series. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new if you've been following along. I certainly had a lot of fun working on it, and I learned quite a bit about Livewire and Alpine along the way. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next series.